Hi, Denise.
Hi.
How this whole episode thing kind of started was every bar cycle, everyone's really worried about the bar exam.
Yes.
And the bar exam passes, and then everyone frantically worries about working and building their career.
Yes.
And not so much for the February exam, but definitely the July exam. And so I wanted to do like a special episode.
Okay, great. Let's do it.
Okay, let's do it. Thanks so much again for doing this show and helping others in your perspective on the hiring process for post-bar candidates and what to do and things that you would think is helpful in finding post-bar employment pre-license specifically. So I approached you in 2013 around Labor Day after the bar exam, and I had been listening to this podcast that you did, This Week in Law, part of the This Week in Tech network, and I just basically said, did you need any help in any way? And I knew that you had an intern before, but they since finished, and it seemed like that you were working alone and with Evan Brown, your co-host at that time. A few short moments later, you replied and said you would take me on.
Absolutely. That must have made you nervous.
Yeah, it did. And now I can say this. I remember you kind of left it open-ended. Like you said, sure, I'll take you on. And then I kind of didn't hear from you for a few days. And then I was like, what should I do? So I replied back and said, and it was probably because of Labor Day weekend and whatever was going on. And then I said, well, what would you like me to do? And then it started where it was kind of more clear. Of course, that's always a good way to get in the door.
Yeah, I think that was phenomenal for you to take the initiative and reach out to somebody who was involved in something that you were interested in and engaged in already. And you not only had a professional interest in it, but just sort of a personal, intellectual interest in it. And yes, you were not our first intern at This Week in Law. You were one of our longest, I think.
Yes.
If not the longest. I have to give credit to Franklin Graves, who is now in-house at Eventbrite. Franklin, out of the blue, years before you did, emailed me and put the thought in my head that, gee, heck yeah, it would be nice to have some help with this. And it doesn't matter where the person is. They don't have to work physically in proximity to me. There's tons they could do to help just at their own computer, wherever they are. And that's how we got started with that. And over the years, I had, 5 or 6 or 7 interns for the show. So it really became a nice thing, I think, for all of us, because you in particular, San, and everyone else, it was a huge help along the way to what we were doing. It's not like we were just kind of killing time and giving you something to put on your resume. It really was a worthwhile exchange. And even though we never paid you a dime, I hope that you got something out of it too.
I did. And it was really nice in terms of afterwards, this continuing somewhat open door where I could just call on you for certain things like this episode, for something I'm doing now, and to offer value to others that are in this kind of limbo of taking the bar exam and now not having anything to do, no longer having to study, but trying to further their career. So yeah, this is great. I hope that I can still hit you up for future things.
Please do. And I think talking through this right now, I hope is demonstrating to your listeners that this relationship, this kind of relationship, is really valuable and really long term. And I have, enormous goodwill toward you because of all you've done for me over the years, and the fact that you did a great job at it, and the fact you were so willing to volunteer your time and skills. And heck yeah, if you reach out to me and need something that I can help with, I will always say yes. And I think that that's a common way for people to feel in my situation. So it's pretty valuable, I think, for folks who are wondering, how do I get my foot in the door? How do I begin to establish that kind of goodwill, even if it's not going to lead to gainful employment immediately? It certainly could be valuable down the road.
Right. And even gainful employment, I remember it was during kind of a limbo time, you actually told me of a job opening with a law office in Irvine for private litigation. And so I guess the point in me saying that is things tend to go down that road. I kind of proved that I was willing to do the work and do whatever it takes. So it's not that you would forget about me. So I guess I just wanted to say that it's worth doing a good job too. And I can always say that I did work for Denise Howell, which I do say, which is kind of a nice thing to be able to say, even though it wasn't in a paying capacity. I wanted to ask if you recall, not that you would recall because it was so far, it was 5 years ago, that you would recall my own resume, but is there any things that would stick out to you in a resume, I guess, that are memorable to you?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question is not the same in all cases. I think it depends on the person reading the resume and the position to be filled. While I was a young junior attorney at various law firms, I was very actively involved in our firm's recruiting efforts. So went to a lot of schools, did a lot of on-campus interviews, did a lot of in-house interviews when we called people back. So I have looked at, I don't know how many hundreds of potential lawyer resumes in the past. And it's good that you're looking for ways to sort of make your resume stand out, but it's not a question of being able to put it on scented paper like Elle Woods and have that always be the magic bullet, you know? I think your resume has to reflect accurately and engagingly who you are. And then where it will wind up doing you the greatest service is when you've connected with a person who you have things in common with, and there are things on your resume that fit well with the position that's open. So don't really think that there's a magic bullet. Your resume is going to work better in some circumstances than it is in others. And it's kind of your job as the job seeker to figure out where that good fit is and make sure you're putting your resume with the people that are going to read it and be engaged and happy with what's on there because it works well for them and the position they're trying to fill.
So I guess what you're saying is those kind of blanket, kind of mass, I don't know if spammy is the right word, but those spammy kind of template, boilerplate resumes you can probably see from a mile away, correct?
I mean, they're all kind of boilerplate. The formatting's not important
Okay.
as far as I'm concerned.
Not a formatting, but the content is kind of this generic, I'm looking to get into the legal field.
Right.
And
You want to put concrete, you want to really put detail on your resume. You don't want to put your general aspirations on there. You want to put what you've done that demonstrates various things that are going to look good for you as the applicant. Commitment, engagement, skill, intellect, curiosity, things in your past that you've done. And it doesn't all, probably shouldn't all be work related, strictly speaking. It should be the things that really speak to you and that you've devoted your time to, whatever that may be.
I just heard of this thing that someone did where they would put non-law related things into their resume, that I'm interested in the history of the Italian mafia, and being kind of into The Sopranos so much anymore, but you know, The Wire and Breaking Bad and all these kind of organized crime TV and shows and stuff. Have you ever seen something like that in your hiring experience?
Yeah, all the time. I think it's pretty common that people have a personal interest section of their resume, which I think is really important. And I don't know that it needs to be cordoned off as a personal interest section. I think of a resume as chunks of experience in chronological order. So if some of your personal experience, some of what's formed you into the person you are today includes a passion for the Italian mafia, I certainly would put more detail than just that. I would say, you know, I've traveled to Italy and done research on this and spoken to people at the Vatican or whatever, you know, I mean, whatever you've done to really pursue that passion of yours, if it's mountain climbing or skiing or scuba diving or whatever, I wouldn't just make a list of your hobbies and interests, but really put some flesh on those bones. And again, yes, as someone who has interviewed hundreds of prospective new lawyers, I can tell you that as the interviewer, you are always looking for a way to connect with the interviewee. You are always looking for a way to get them drawn out and talking about themselves. So you want to, you want first of all to see how they express themselves and how they describe something that they're passionate about. You want part of the interview process is simply to see, can I see myself and my colleagues spending long periods of time with this person? And so day in and day out in a professional environment, is that going to be pleasant for everyone concerned? So you definitely want to get the person talking about something that they care about. And ideally, you want to have some sort of personal connection with them, even if you're not yourself interested in the Italian mafia. It's certainly an interesting topic, and maybe you could learn something and find some common ground along the way. And that's definitely part of what interviewers are doing when they're interviewing you.
So getting back to 2013, my wife had these little thank you cards, and I sent one out to you just thanking you for the opportunity. I have heard that, and it was already when you allowed me to help out, but I have heard of sending them as soon as possible after the interview to kind of tip the decision in your favor, so to speak, because if they've interviewed all these candidates, this little extra thank you or gratitude for the opportunity to interview would be looked at a little better. Would you say that is something that you would value as a recruiter?
It's definitely something I have valued along the way when people take the time to either write a handwritten note or an email or even a text if for some reason that's appropriate and you have the person's phone number. Yeah, just some little reminder, hey, it was so good talking with you about this, this, and this, and use detail, let them know that you're not just sending these out as a batch to 20 different people that you spoke with and they all say the same thing. Let them know you specifically remember them, your interviewer, and the conversation you had and what stuck with you from that conversation, what was meaningful for you and why you came away thinking, you don't have to put this down in any kind of detail, but the context of your note should be that you have reached the conclusion that, hey, if your colleagues are like you and I'm like me, I feel like we have that good synergy where we could work together and not drive each other crazy. So that should come across.
It's like the first impression for this long relationship. I see why you keep on getting at that. So there's this kind of conundrum where once people are post-bar pre-result, they have this kind of indicator that once they do get their license, are they going to leave that job? So when you were recruiting, I guess my question would be, would that ever be an indicator that you would not want that particular person for the job because they're about to pass and be in a different situation?
They're going to better deal you when they pass the bar.
Right.
I think you have to be real upfront about that as the interviewee, that you have to lay out what your desires and expectations of the employment are. And if it's just a quick way to make money and you hope to go on to a loftier position of some kind after you've passed the bar and gotten your credentials, then just be real straightforward about that, because the last thing you want to do is come out of an employment situation with the person who's employed you not having a whole lot of goodwill towards you and feeling in some way like you deceived them or burned them. So don't let that happen. I have kind of a follow-up to what I was just saying. I mean, you were asking about that specific situation of I'm looking at this in a temporary way and communicating that to your employer. I think in general, people get, especially, in the specific situation that you asked me about today, you've taken the bar exam, you're waiting for your results, you don't have full-time employment yet. I think there is a tendency to have a kind of desperation in that situation to the point where you want to maybe conceal some things that you might otherwise be straightforward about. And I encourage people to resist that impulse, because the more straightforward you are in general about your abilities and limitations as an employee, the more goodwill and good relationship you and your employer are going to have. So, if you have family obligations, if you've got a long commute that's going to make it hard for you to cover everything, you can't just try and go in there and be the model eager beaver employee that you think they want to see just for the sake of getting the job. Because then when you get there and there are other considerations that you haven't bothered to really hash through, and you can't live up to being that model employee that maybe they didn't even need, I mean, you just have to go in and say, look, this is what I can do for you. Let's just make sure that your expectations and my abilities match up well, and never be hesitant to, if you do feel like you've said yes to too much, to being very straightforward about that and going, gee, I really thought I could get this all done myself. And turns out this is really more of a 4-person job than a 1-person job, given where I am and what my responsibilities and obligations are outside of work. Just communication is everything in maintaining good employment relationships. And if your employer is worth working for, they'll be grateful for it, and they'll course correct to make sure that you're able to do your best job and that the work is getting done competently and well for the clients.
Just one thing to add to that too is it's really kind of this small world that keeps on. Even that job, I remember one of the partners at that firm that you told me about where they had an opening, he was actually a professor or he did some part-time adjunct constitutional law course at my school. So it's kind of this small world that you keep on seeing the same people over and over, it seems.
And more so now than ever, right? I mean, when you reminded me that I started practicing law in 1990, so 29 years ago this year.
I was going to edit that out, actually. But
No, that's fine. I earned each and every one of those years, right? But the huge difference between then and now is back then computers were for word processing. That's,
right.
And we were still using some typewriters even then. So there is a huge connected online world that didn't exist then, that exists now. And it's great in some senses because your ability to reach out to people and find what jobs are available, I think is just a completely different universe than the one I grew up in. But as you point out, everything is connected and there's no getting away from anything you've done that you might regret.
I thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Out.
I've subscribed to Triangulation.
Thank you. Yeah.
I've heard you on
long-form interview show at the Twit Network, twit.tv. Triangulation's about a 2-hour one-on-one interview format show with some of the smartest, sometimes really, really well-known people in the technology industry. And even if they're not really, really well-known, the way we select the guests for that show is just they're very interesting to talk to because of the work that they're doing and the things that they study and are involved in. So I love doing the show because it's super fascinating conversation each and every time we do it. I think my next 2 are March 15th and March 22nd.
Very cool. I think somebody has a birthday coming up too.
That's true. That's a good little thing to throw in at the end. If you can remember and do nice things like that for the folks that you've worked with, it's, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
You're very welcome. And then you also have this Inbox 5K newsletter that you're putting out.
That's right.
Weekly.
Yes. If anyone is interested in me, who I am, what I've done for the last 29 years, I have a website. It's denisehowell.info. Lots of info there. And there is a page there. It's denisehowell.info/newsletter, logically enough, where you can subscribe to this newsletter that I started, which is a little bit of tech policy, trying to send it out every week. Some tech policy, tech law hits up front. And then, as I think we've been discussing throughout our talk here, because people are not, even if they're in the legal industry, strictly creatures of the law, there's a little bit more in there. There are good things to support, ways to live a more sustainable life, which is becoming more important to me as I become an older and older person. And what else do I have in there? Like a little entertainment related stuff. If I've seen something that I think is really, or listened to something that I think is really interesting and worth passing along, I'll provide you with, Netflix or podcast recommendations or what have you. And a little bit more entertainment related kind of food and drink things. And then that's about it. So it's a little bit lifestyle, but a little bit tech law too.
I just wanted to add in one last thing there is, since this is targeted to post-bar kind of California students, I know your last guest on triangulation was a professor from Chapman.
Correct.
And then the one before was a professor from somewhere in the East Coast, I believe.
That's right.
A female. So it's kind of neat because you can hear your professor that you may have had at Chapman Law speaking with Denise.
Right. Tom W. Bell, he authored a book called Your Next Government, and really fascinating. It was about the privatization of government and how that's already happening, even if people don't think about it that much. His book was really fascinating, and so was he to talk to. And then the other professor you were referring to is Kate Klonick. She's at St. John's University, and she wrote a really fascinating, it wasn't a book, it was a paper called The New Governors, the People, Rules, and Processes Governing Online Speech, all about social platforms and how these platforms are maybe sort of a good companion show to Tom W. Bell's. They were both talking about how government is shifting and some of these private companies are taking on some of the roles that we traditionally have seen governments do. So both really interesting. Yes, I love talking to law professors. It's so funny when you're in law school, you really don't care that much about your law professors. But you talk to them in a situation where you don't have to ace their class. They're really interesting.
Right.
So,
I'm not sure if it was him, but I'm pretty sure I was studying there one time around Halloween, when I was like a second year or something. I'm almost positive that he is the one who dressed up as Heisenberg.
What does a Heisenberg costume look like exactly?
He had this kind of hat, and then he had the glasses, like Walter White from Breaking Bad. Anyway, so thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure this will be super helpful and put people at ease in what they should be thinking about when they're sending out these resumes and looking for something in this results. And then right before results, there's this anxiety thing that happens, which I'm kind of trying to get somebody to talk about the psychological of how to calm down. And
yeah, that's so important. I mean, I don't stay on top of the statistics, but every time I do see them, they seem to be getting worse about the stress involved in trying to pursue a legal career. And some of the worst of it, I think, goes into that time around getting employed and, gee, I spent all this time and invested all this money, and am I ever going to make any of that back? And how am I going to pay off my student loans? And so it's terrible. The suicide rate, the alcoholism and drug abuse rate is completely unacceptable and terrible. So anything that you or I can do to help people feel at ease and take a deep breath, and yes, you should definitely get a guest on, since you and I are not mental health experts, who is one, and talk about those specific issues and how to just stand back and realize that even if what you're doing now and what you have your eye on now doesn't specifically work out for you, it is not the end of the world. And that sometimes the bad things that happen to you, or the things that look like setbacks, will wind up being blessings in disguise. You just have to look at them that way and think about how they can be.
Right. Completely. I agree with you. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Denise.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to see you again.